Multilingualism in assessment feedback. Richards and Schmidt broadly define feedback as any information that provides information on the result of behavior. They go on to define it in teaching terms, where feedback refers to comments or other information that learners receive concerning their success on learning tasks or tests, either from the teacher or other persons. Feedback can be provided and/or used in the context of either formative assessment or summative assessment. Formative assessment are assessments that teachers give that allow students to continue to learn within the program they are studying. For example, any continuous assessment task. Summative assessment are assessments that are given at the end of the course that allow for reflection on what has been learned. For example, exams at the end of the course. A special type of context is when teaching is going on, in what is called dynamic assessment. Here, teaching and assessment are inseparable. One feeds into and builds on the other. For example, a teacher may ask a question, and based on the student's feedback, the teacher may decide on the direction of the lesson, such as should content be repeated, other connections made, and so forth. Different sources of feedback include teacher feedback. Teacher feedback should support the student's learning. For example, a teacher gives helpful comments, written or spoken, to help close the gap between the learner's current knowledge and the goal of the assessment. Peer feedback. This is where learners assist each other to help improve knowledge. For example, students commenting on each other's written work or oral answers. Self-feedback can be a student discovering an area of strength or weakness in an assessment task. For example, as a result of reading some more and using this discovery to improve their learning. Feedback can be gestural. Depending on what's appropriate in the culture, it could be nodding, thumbs up, shaking the head, eye movements, hand movements, and so on. Written, rubrics, which are criteria for grading, annotations, which are comments on the margins or in between lines addressing specific issues, global comments, scores, and so on. Spoken. The teacher orally confirming or disapproving a student's answer, side chats between the students, and so on. Feedback allows the teacher to identify learner strengths, reinforce positive behavior, identify in learner-specific areas requiring further development, and evaluate, validate, or rethink teaching strategy. Feedback allows the learners to notice their strengths, be encouraged to maintain or develop certain learning practices, notice areas in need of attention or further work, and modify learning practices or behaviors. Before we discuss the issue of incorporating multilingualism into assessment feedback, let's do a quick quiz. Hallo, goeiemorgen, molweni, guten Tag, Jumbo. Assessment feedback, as we have seen, seeks to reinforce or modify relevant behaviors in order to improve learning. Feedback is therefore an activity in teaching and learning. If we agree that there are benefits to incorporating multilingualism into teaching and learning, then feedback can also be beneficially multilingual. The key question is, in what ways can feedback incorporate multilingualism? Written feedback, as was seen, can take the form of annotations on the margins of a student's script. Depending on the circumstances, it may well be that annotated feedback in another language or in a blend of languages is considered better able to improve learning. In this example, the teacher is trying to improve the English language use of the student by using another language, which in this case is Afrikaans, to point out that in English it is not correct to say distinguish the difference between. The feedback then offers two alternative ways of expressing the intended idea. In this example, the teacher has determined that a particular behavior, that is, applying theory to data, will be better understood by the particular student if communicated in esse causa. A rubric is interesting because it allows the teacher to communicate generic feedback, but it also allows the student to discover what is specific to them, what will help them to improve, or what they are being encouraged to continue doing. In this example, we see a rubric developed for writing skills tasks that uses English and Odia, a language spoken in India. We see examples of what is called code switching and code mixing. Considering the background of the students, the teacher has determined that feedback will be better taken up if presented in a way that draws on several languages. Let us look at spoken feedback. But before I continue, who can remind us of the definition of feedback? It is the teacher's response to the student's answer that should be in Afrikaans. That's the feedback and not the student's answer. Isn't it the teacher's response to the student's answer? Okay. Is that all? I think maybe the teacher's written response to the student's answer. Okay. I see either you did not pay attention to some of the important aspects, or you have forgotten. Let us revise what we said. Dis nie net die onderwyser wat terugvoer kan gee nie. Onthou jy? Terugvoer word nie slegs geskryf nie. Feedback has a purpose, which is to influence behavior in order to improve learning. As we saw now, the teacher first tries to determine if previous knowledge has been understood. At the end of the exchange, the teacher's feedback is communicated in English and Afrikaans. The teacher's perception of gaps in the student's knowledge then determines how the lesson is continued. As we saw earlier, feedback can also be provided by peers. For example, in the form of siding or side chats that students engage in under the radar while the teacher is teaching. Imagine in class, student Jade answers the teacher's question. Now before or after a response, if any, from the teacher, fellow student Jessica whispers feedback to Jade, confirming the correctness of the answer or suggesting a more appropriate answer. This would be an example of spoken peer feedback. If multilingual teaching and learning is widely acknowledged as having benefits, there is no reason to think that assessment feedback, which as seen earlier is a form of teaching and learning, will not have benefits if delivered multilingually. But let's use one case study to illustrate. This was a case study with the bilingual rubrics. These bilingual rubrics were made available to students learning English in 3 rural schools in Rhodesia as feedback in their English writing skill classes. 6 months later, the portfolio of students' writing in the 3 schools was examined. The perceived impact of the bilingual rubric on the students is presented in this table. The table outlines the performance of the 95 students on 3 criteria. 1. Task achievement, 2. Sentence formation and vocabulary, and 3. Mechanics. The code A stands for visible progress of a learner that leads to a higher level of performance. Code B stands for some progress which may or may not necessarily lead to a higher level of performance. And Code C stands for absence of progress. The bilingual rubric is seen as having the least benefit for mechanics, but leading to visible progress in sentence formation and vocabulary, and especially in the task achievement and organization. The study found that students who received feedback in both languages had a better performance than those who only received feedback in one language.
Created using Powtoon.